with respect to comments that were made by St. Vincent and the Grenadines Prime Minister, Dr. Ralph Gonsalves, saying, there's been this entire conversation raised once more about, in some instances, women being part of the cause for young men committing crimes. To have this conversation and expand on what was suggested, I'm joined by Dr. Gabrielle Hosein. She's a senior lecturer at the Institute for Gender and Development Studies at the University of the West Indies St. Augustine campus. Good morning, Dr. Hosein.
Good morning to you and your viewers.
Well, thank you very much for joining me. Dr. Hosein, Dr. Ralph Gonsalves said attractive women are actually part of violent crimes perpetrated by men. Suggesting that men associate with young women, in some cases, who are high maintenance and have to rob and steal and kill and deal drugs in order to maintain these young, beautiful, high maintenance women. There has been public reaction already, mixed reaction, need I say. What are your thoughts on these comments by the Prime Minister?
First of all, as I commented in the Newsday, I believe yesterday, I really think that we should not give sexist comments even more media room than they've been given. So let me instead deal with some of the things that we should be thinking about, which is that, first of all, we know that the issues of crime and violence are linked to such things as not only poverty and not only poor educational outcomes, poor literacy, family violence, family trauma, but also we know they're linked to our beliefs and values around manhood. So we know that having a gun, being in a gang, committing crimes, being able to live off the illegal economy, and being able to get respect and status because people fear you are all standard aspects of masculinity in our society and globally. We see it in music, we see it in movies. And so the conversation we need to have about men really is one about asking what are the beliefs and values about manhood that lead men to crime and violence. That's the first thing. And secondly, what are the kinds of relationships that they are in that lead them towards crime and violence? And I would argue, based on scholarship that exists in the Caribbean, that the relationships that lead them to crime and violence are less the ones that are in their families, whether it's their partners, their children, their parents, but the ones that they have with other men around them. We know, for example, that teenage boys may be killed when they refuse to join a gang in a community. We know that when men go to prison, because there's no programs for men on remand, and men can be on remand for long periods of time, that one of the ways that men also survive in prison is by being protected by a gang who they then have to become loyal to when they leave prison. And so in the scholarship, we first want to look at men's relations with other men, not just fathers or brothers or uncles, but the men widely around them, and then the images of masculinity that become available to men as having high status and power and authority, which poor men can access, and to help us understand how poor men try to access those kinds of ideals. And we should start there before we blame women for what men do.
Dr. Hosein, I agree with you. There needs to be a conversation about masculinity and manhood. And as much as we are speaking about that, we should acknowledge that in instances, young men actually perhaps look up to gang leaders and even aspire to be gang leaders, if that is the case, because of the power and the manhood associated with it. So if we are to have that conversation and to accept that, is there also an acceptance or perhaps an understanding that there is a possibility that women actually subscribe to such behavior or such aspirations?
Sure. I mean, these are ideals in our society, and all of us, regardless of whether or not we're women or men, are socialized by sexist, racist, classist, homophobic beliefs and values, and women don't necessarily grow up in this society and somehow emerge with a oppositional or alternate consciousness just because they're women. We are all socialized by these social norms. So, of course, women and men will share many of these ideals. Women sometimes can be critical of social norms because they're aware of how they are subordinated or excluded or oppressed or, violated by them. But yes, and so where these ideas of manhood are the ones that carry higher status, power, and authority, women and girls may also aspire to those kinds of behaviors because those are the ones that get respect. Those are the ones that get you money. Those are the ones that give you a sense of leadership in a community. And so masculine ways of behaving, which can be toxic, can in fact be adopted by both women and men. And that's why our goals aren't to not to blame men or blame women. That's why our goals are always to transform our beliefs and values, but also to transform the options that are available to men, in this case, because they're the predominant perpetrators of crime and violence, but also transform the options that are available to women so that they too can continue to be the ones in society that create values or that reproduce relations and values of caring and nurturing, whether for families or communities.
I want to get to that point in a moment, but is it that, arguably, the majority of the reports that we see on a daily basis of crimes being committed are by men. But is that an issue with respect to reporting crimes that are committed by women? And there's even been an argument about physical and sexual abuse that women commit against men that is not reported for many reasons. Do you think that it is that reporting as well that to a certain extent has sheltered or shadowed the crimes that are committed by women?
Well, I think there's pretty good data collection on who commits specific kinds of crimes like robberies, assaults, murders, because so I don't think that there is I don't think that there is underrepresentation in the data of women actually committing crimes when they do. I think in relation to interpersonal violence, domestic violence, and relationship violence, I think it is underreported by both men and women. And I think both men and women do not get the services and the treatment that they would like to get when they go to report, whether in police stations or as they try to go through the court system. So an argument is popularly made that men are, embarrassed when they go to the police station and men are not given the respect and the treatment that they should be and all of that, and their needs are not met. But that argument has been made about women for decades and also continues to be made about the way that women's needs are met when they are victims of domestic violence of various kinds. So I think that there's underreporting by both women and men. I think that the data shows that while women may also be aggressive, or violent, or conflictual in relationships, and I'm sure that there are men who are violent out there, and I'm sure that there are men who are victims out there. And of course, we want no men or women to be victims of any kind of violence. I think that the data also shows us that men kill women, right, commit femicide at a rate that women simply do not. And that is an absolute line in the sand that we must draw in society when we try to say that women are more violent than men. The data just does not show up in terms of femicide in justifying that position. Mm-hmm. That said, our position as a society is that women should not be violent to men, just as men should not be violent to women, and to call for our social systems to find ways. And I think there are small efforts all over, and of course the work of shelters, 800 SAVE, the call line that you can call to report domestic violence, family services, and so on. I think there are small efforts, but we know that the rate of family violence, domestic violence, violence against women in some cases, violence against men. We know that what's happening in the family with the rates of violence that exist, including against children, if you look at the child abuse rate, that a lot of what is happening in our society is stemming from what's happening in the family. And so that's really where a lot of our focus needs to be. If we can create families where the abuse is reduced, we can therefore reduce the crime as it spirals as a ripple effect. That said, and I think this is an important point to make, the population needs to know that there have been decades of proposals for reducing crime. For example, prison reform is a major one, and so we're not looking for things that have not been said. We are not looking for solutions that have not been proposed. We are looking for those that make decisions to show that they are aware of what has been proposed over decades, that they are aware of what it is they can implement in the short, medium, and long term, and the challenges, and that they are finding ways to use those proposals to actually implement for us to see some change.
Well, these particular programs that are perhaps already in place, or the ones that are hoped to be implemented, implementation is a buzzword, are they really going to reach? I mean, the ones that exist, do they reach the young men that are really in need of them? I mean, how could we give some level of assurance that, okay, we're creating a program, we're implementing it, but we can guarantee it's going to reach those who need it?
Absolutely. The data from around the region, whether we look at countries like Belize and what they have done with prison rehabilitation for young men, if we look in Trinidad and Tobago with Wishing for Wings, Debbie Jacobs' work with young men who are institutionalized, who then she went on to mentor their writing, creative writing. If we look at what ALTA does in terms of identifying that the men who commit crimes are primarily men who have not finished school and have literacy challenges, absolutely, the data exists out there, and when you speak to those that are working in the field, they we have a lot of people that know what they're doing in Trinidad and Tobago, and who are fighting to have what they're doing be scaled up, and who are often hitting a wall when they need for their efforts to be scaled up on a national level or through state services. I'll give you one other example that I think we do know exists, and all of the data globally says exists, and that is the Health and Family Life Education Program in schools. And if we want to reduce crime and violence, I really want the population to be able to make a call to the government, to the state, to say that we need to teach about GBV in schools, gender-based violence. Teach GBV prevention in schools should be a motto, should be a call, should be a slogan in the lips of everyone in the country. Teach GBV prevention in schools. And the way to do that is through the Health and Family Life Education Program, which reaches the widest number of students, including those who may not have families that can provide the support and education for them, or families where they are experiencing violence. I'm not sure if I made the point that I wanted your viewers to keep the idea of health and family life education.
Mm-hmm. That's the last point.
And to be able to call, because the HFLE curriculum is not being adequately taught, to call for GBV, gender-based violence prevention, to be taught in schools. And so I'm not sure if I was able to make that point, but I do want to make sure.
That was actually the final points that you were touching on. But my final question, actually, before we conclude this discussion, is masculinity the standalone factor?
Sorry, is what?
Is masculinity a standalone factor?
Oh, great. That's a great question. No, it's not actually, but if we don't look at the issues of crime and violence without including an analysis of masculinity, we will be coming with such a partial perspective that we will not be effective. So, for example, if we are talking about crimes being committed by youth, but we don't differentiate between male and female youth, then we are misapprehending what is happening among youth who are perpetrators, who are victims, and what kinds of issues they are differently facing. So it is not a standalone factor, but as we discuss the kinds of proposals that have been made over decades that need implementation, that are proven to be effective, whether, as I said, it is teaching about GBV in schools, prison reform, perpetrator counseling programs, because perpetrators are not born bad people, and those programs have been proven to be effective in Guyana as well as in Grenada, for example. As we go through each of the kinds of solutions that really can make a difference in the medium to long term, and this is different from policing, I think that we have to include an analysis of masculinity. And anytime anyone is having a discussion about this with you and they are not bringing in an understanding of how our beliefs and values around manhood shape these issues, they are not going to be effective. And at the same time, it's not a standalone issue. And as we conclude, I want to say that, we have to be careful of politicians sometimes, not be led by them, but be the ones to lead whom they must follow. Follow those who are doing the work on the ground, who, have the experience, who have been making the change, and make them the ones that the politicians need to get their talking points from, and value ourselves as citizens doing excellent work to kind of keep our society together, and stay focused on the conversations that we should be having, not the ones that distract us from things that can actually make a change.
Dr. Gabrielle Hosein, thank you very much for your time this morning.
It's been a pleasure.
Very good conversation.